Joel Goldsmith discovered something so powerful in 1955 that he kept it secret from most students. He called it the invisible treatment, a method that dissolves any problem without effort, prayer, or mental work. This wasn't meditation or affirmation. This was pure consciousness recognizing its own infinite nature. The secret wasn't complex rituals or lengthy prayers. It was the realization that God's presence is already complete, already perfect, already here. When you stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything, you align with what Joel called the already accomplished fact of spiritual perfection. Most students spent years learning complicated metaphysical treatments. Meanwhile, Joel used this invisible method to heal instantly. He would simply rest in the knowing that Spirit is the only power, the only presence, the only reality. Nothing else exists to be healed or changed. Tonight you'll learn what Joel whispered only to his closest students. This invisible treatment that works while you sleep, while you work, while you live. The secret that transforms everything without you doing anything at all. Joel tested this invisible treatment on Sarah, a woman dying of cancer in 1956. Doctors gave her 3 weeks. Joel didn't pray for her healing. Instead, he rested in the spiritual truth that disease has no reality in God's perfect creation. He held the consciousness of wholeness. Within 10 days, Sarah's tumors began shrinking. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. Joel knew better. When consciousness recognizes only Spirit's perfection, the illusion of disease simply dissolves. No struggle, no effort, no mental manipulation required. The invisible treatment works because it doesn't try to change anything. It recognizes what is already true. God is the only power, the only presence, the only life. When you rest in this truth, harmony appears automatically. Reality adjusts to match spiritual consciousness. Joel kept this secret because most people want to do something, fix something, heal something. But the invisible treatment does everything by doing nothing. It's the hardest teaching to accept and the most powerful to experience. In his private journals, Joel wrote that traditional prayer often reinforces the very problems we're trying to solve. When you pray for healing, you affirm that sickness is real. When you pray for money, you confirm lack exists. The invisible treatment does the opposite. Instead of asking God to change circumstances, you recognize that God's perfection is already expressing everywhere. You rest in the completed fact of harmony. You don't treat the problem. You rest in the solution that already exists in consciousness. Joel discovered that when you stop giving power to appearances and rest in spiritual reality, miracles happen naturally. The invisible treatment is consciousness recognizing its own completeness. No words needed, no time required, no effort involved. This is why some students experienced instant healing while others struggled for years. The ones who stopped trying and started resting in truth found immediate freedom. The invisible treatment works when nothing else does because it aligns with how Spirit actually operates. The invisible treatment has 3 simple steps Joel never taught publicly. First, stop trying to change anything. Second, rest in the knowing that God's perfection is already complete. Third, watch as harmony appears without your effort or interference. Joel called this resting in the finished kingdom. Instead of working toward healing, you rest in wholeness. Instead of trying to manifest supply, you rest in abundance. Instead of seeking peace, you rest in the peace that passes understanding. When students asked Joel why their treatments weren't working, he would quietly share this secret. Stop treating. Start resting. Stop doing. Start being. Stop trying to fix what God has already perfected. The invisible treatment is consciousness at rest in truth. Tonight, as you learn this hidden method, remember Joel's final words to his inner circle. The greatest spiritual work is often invisible work. The most powerful healing happens when you stop healing and start resting in what is already whole. Margaret, a Joel Goldsmith student, lost her home to foreclosure in 1958. She had tried every metaphysical technique, affirmations, visualizations, prosperity treatments. Nothing worked. Desperate, she wrote to Joel asking what she was doing wrong with her spiritual practice. Joel's response changed everything. He told her to stop treating for supply and instead rest in the invisible truth that God's abundance is already flowing perfectly. No mental work required. Simply rest in the completed fact of divine provision. Within 3 weeks, Margaret received an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative she never knew existed. The amount was exactly what she needed to save her home, plus enough to live comfortably. She hadn't done anything except rest in truth. Joel explained that her previous treatments were actually blocking her good by affirming lack was real and needed to be overcome. The invisible treatment recognizes abundance as already present, already flowing, already expressing as every needed thing. Robert, a businessman, came to Joel in 1960 with a failing company. He owed $60,000 and faced bankruptcy. Joel taught him the invisible treatment instead of traditional metaphysical methods. No affirmations about prosperity, no visualizations of success. Joel instructed Robert to simply rest in the spiritual truth that God's intelligence governs all true activity. Don't try to save the business. Don't mentally work for customers or sales. Just rest in the knowing that Spirit's perfect plan is already unfolding. Within 6 months, 3 competing companies approached Robert with buyout offers. The final sale netted him over $200,000 after paying all debts. Robert asked Joel how this was possible. Joel smiled and said, "Consciousness at rest in truth moves mountains invisibly." The invisible treatment works in business because it aligns with spiritual law rather than struggling against it. When you stop trying to force outcomes and rest in divine order, right action happens automatically through invisible spiritual activity. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a physician, discovered Joel's invisible treatment in 1962 after watching patient after patient suffer despite medical intervention. She began applying this secret method alongside traditional treatment, resting in the truth that God's healing is already complete. Her patients began experiencing remarkable recoveries, not through her medical skill alone, but through the invisible activity of consciousness recognizing wholeness. She would treat medically while resting in spiritual perfection. The combination created what colleagues called miraculous results. One patient with advanced heart disease was scheduled for risky surgery. Dr. Chen applied the invisible treatment, resting in the truth that God's perfect life governs every heartbeat. The pre-surgery tests showed complete cardiac function restoration. Joel later told Dr. Chen that the invisible treatment doesn't replace human wisdom, but elevates it. When consciousness rests in truth, all right action, medical, spiritual, practical, flows naturally. The invisible treatment enhances everything without interfering with anything. Thomas, Joel's private secretary, witnessed hundreds of healing testimonies that were never published. People wrote about depression lifting overnight, relationships healing instantly, financial crises resolving without human intervention, all through the invisible treatment Joel shared privately. The secret was always the same. Stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything. Rest in the spiritual fact that God's perfection is already complete, already present, already expressing as every needed good. Let the invisible treatment work while you rest in truth. One letter described a mother whose autistic son began speaking normally after she applied the invisible treatment for 30 days. She stopped trying to heal her child and rested in the truth that God's intelligence is already perfect in every child. Joel kept detailed records of these invisible treatment results, but never published them. He feared people would try to use the method to get things rather than rest in truth. The invisible treatment works through being, not doing. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more. Joel Goldsmith Wisdom, and comment, what healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the basic invisible treatment, Joel developed advanced techniques he shared only with his closest students. The first advanced method involves consciousness multiplication. When you rest in truth for yourself, you simultaneously rest in truth for everyone. Joel discovered that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are one. When you apply the invisible treatment to your situation, you're actually applying it to all similar situations everywhere. Your healing becomes everyone's healing through the oneness of spirit. He taught this to Martha, who was struggling with chronic anxiety. Instead of treating her own fear, she rested in the truth that God's peace is the only presence everywhere, for everyone. Her anxiety dissolved as she realized she was resting in universal peace. The consciousness multiplication technique works because there's only one consciousness appearing as many individuals. When you rest in truth, you're not just healing your experience, you're contributing to the healing of all consciousness everywhere. Joel's second advanced technique was invisible blessing. Instead of asking for blessings, you recognize that you are the blessing consciousness is giving to the world. You rest in the truth that God expresses as you, through you, in you. When James lost his job at age 55, Joel taught him invisible blessing rather than traditional prosperity work. James stopped trying to find a job and began resting in the truth that he was consciousness's gift to the workplace, wherever that might be. 3 companies approached James within 2 months, each offering positions better than what he had lost. He realized that when consciousness rests in its own perfection, right opportunities appear automatically. No struggle, no networking, no desperation required. Invisible blessing works because it aligns with spiritual law. You are not trying to get something from God. You are recognizing yourself as God's gift to every situation. When you rest in this truth, right placement happens naturally. The third advanced technique Joel called temporal transcendence. Most people try to heal the past or secure the future. The invisible treatment works only in the eternal now, where God's perfection is always complete and always present. When consciousness rests in the timeless truth of spirit, past mistakes lose their power and future fears dissolve. You're not healing yesterday's problems or preventing tomorrow's challenges. You're resting in the now where only perfection exists. Joel taught this to David, haunted by childhood trauma and worried about financial security. Instead of treating the past trauma or the future financial fears, David learned to rest in the present truth where God's love and provision are eternally complete. Within months, David's emotional healing was complete and his financial situation stabilized naturally. He discovered that resting in eternal truth automatically corrects both past shadows and future anxieties without directly addressing either one. Joel's most advanced invisible treatment technique was transparent identity. Instead of trying to improve yourself or change your circumstances, you rest in the truth that your real identity is consciousness itself, expressing as individual experience. When you realize you are not a person trying to contact God, but consciousness appearing as personal experience, the invisible treatment becomes automatic. You're not applying spiritual truth to human problems. You're recognizing yourself as spiritual truth expressing perfectly. This technique requires complete surrender of personal identity. You stop being someone with problems and start being consciousness with perfect expression. The invisible treatment then works continuously because you are the treatment. Joel warned that transparent identity was the most challenging technique because the human mind wants to maintain separateness. But those who mastered it found instant access to healing, supply, guidance, and peace without ever having to apply spiritual treatments again. Students often struggled with the invisible treatment because they expected immediate visible results. Joel explained that invisible spiritual activity often precedes visible change by weeks or months. The treatment is working even when appearances suggest otherwise. When consciousness rests in truth, spiritual activity begins immediately, but may not appear in the physical realm instantly. Joel taught students to measure success by their inner peace, not outer circumstances. Peace indicates the invisible treatment is working perfectly. Lucy applied the invisible treatment for her failing marriage but saw no immediate changes in her husband's behavior. Joel encouraged her to maintain her rest in truth regardless of appearances. 2 months later, her husband began counseling voluntarily, and their relationship transformed. The invisible treatment requires patience with the unfolding process. Consciousness works perfectly, but not always according to human timelines. When you rest in truth consistently, harmony appears at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way. Another common challenge was trying to use the invisible treatment to get specific outcomes. Joel emphasized that you cannot rest in truth and simultaneously try to manipulate results. The treatment works through surrender, not control. When students tried to direct the invisible treatment toward particular goals, it stopped working. The moment you try to use spiritual truth to achieve personal desires, you've stopped resting in truth and started working from human willpower. Joel taught Gerald, who wanted to use the invisible treatment to win back his ex-wife, that true spiritual treatment rests in whatever outcome serves the highest good. Gerald had to surrender his specific desire and rest in divine love's perfect expression. Paradoxically, when Gerald stopped trying to get his wife back and rested in truth about perfect love, she returned on her own. The invisible treatment works only when you stop trying to make it work for personal objectives. Physical symptoms often intensified temporarily when students began the invisible treatment. Joel explained this as consciousness purifying itself of false beliefs. What appears as worsening conditions is actually improvement occurring at invisible levels. The invisible treatment works by dissolving the mental causes of physical problems. As consciousness releases false beliefs about limitation, sickness, or lack, these beliefs may express more intensely before disappearing completely. This is healing in progress, not treatment failure. Joel compared it to cleaning house. Everything looks messier before it becomes clean. When consciousness rests in truth, false beliefs surface to be dissolved. Physical appearances may temporarily worsen while spiritual healing is completing itself. Students who understood this process maintained their rest in truth, regardless of appearances. Those who got discouraged by temporary intensification often abandoned the invisible treatment just before their breakthrough would have occurred. The final challenge Joel addressed was spiritual pride, the tendency to feel superior because you know advanced spiritual techniques. The invisible treatment only works through humility and genuine surrender to truth rather than personal spiritual achievement. When students began experiencing results, some developed ego about their spiritual advancement. Joel warned that the moment you credit yourself with spiritual healing, you've stopped resting in truth and started taking credit for God's work. He taught that the invisible treatment is consciousness recognizing itself, not personal accomplishment. You don't heal anyone or anything, you simply get out of the way and let truth express its own perfection without human interference or pride. The most advanced practitioners were often the most humble, recognizing themselves as transparent witnesses to Spirit's work, rather than spiritual healers or advanced students. Humility keeps the invisible treatment pure and powerful. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Joel's private student Caroline applied the invisible treatment to her teenage son's drug addiction. Instead of fighting the problem or trying to control her son's choices, she rested in the truth that God's perfect love was already governing her son's life perfectly. For 6 months, nothing visible changed. Her son continued using drugs and missing school. But Caroline maintained her rest in truth, knowing that consciousness was working invisibly to restore her son to his perfect spiritual identity, regardless of current appearances. In the 7th month, her son voluntarily entered rehabilitation and completed the program successfully. He later told Caroline he felt something shift inside him around the time she stopped trying to fix him and started trusting divine love to guide him. Joel explained that the invisible treatment often works most powerfully in relationships when you stop trying to change others and rest in truth about their spiritual perfection. Love works invisibly to awaken others to their own wholeness. Business executive Frank used the invisible treatment during a hostile corporate takeover that threatened to destroy his company and eliminate hundreds of jobs. Instead of fighting the takeover or trying to manipulate outcomes, he rested in truth about divine order. Frank stopped attending strategy meetings focused on defeating the takeover. Instead, he spent that time resting in the invisible truth that God's intelligence governs all true business activity and that right outcomes would unfold naturally without human manipulation. The takeover attempt collapsed when investigators discovered financial irregularities in the acquiring company. Frank's business not only survived, but received 3 partnership offers from ethical companies seeking his reputation for integrity and sound management. Joel later told Frank that the invisible treatment works in business by aligning activity with spiritual principle. When consciousness rests in truth, dishonest activity exposes itself and righteous activity prospers naturally without human scheming or struggle. Helen applied the invisible treatment to chronic depression that had resisted therapy and medication for 15 years. Joel taught her to rest in the truth that God's joy is her natural state regardless of chemical imbalances or psychological patterns. Instead of fighting depression or trying to feel better, Helen learned to rest in the invisible truth that consciousness is eternally joyful and that this joy was already present even when not felt emotionally. She stopped trying to heal depression and started resting in perfect joy. Gradually, Helen's brain chemistry began normalizing without medication changes. Her therapist was amazed by the transformation. Helen realized that resting in truth about her spiritual nature had allowed her body and mind to align with consciousness's natural harmony. Joel explained that the invisible treatment works with mental conditions by recognizing the mind's spiritual nature rather than trying to fix psychological problems. When consciousness rests in its own perfection, mental harmony appears automatically. Joel's most dramatic invisible treatment case involved Patricia, whose husband died suddenly, leaving her with 3 children and overwhelming debt. Traditional positive thinking and prosperity affirmations had failed to improve her desperate situation. Joel taught Patricia to rest in the invisible truth that God's love was already providing perfectly for her family, even though current circumstances suggested abandonment and lack. She stopped trying to solve problems and started resting in divine provision. Within 3 months, Patricia's late husband's business partner offered her a management position she was uniquely qualified for despite having no formal business training. The salary covered all expenses plus established college funds for each child. Joel emphasized that the invisible treatment works in crisis by recognizing that consciousness is never actually in crisis. When you rest in truth about divine love and provision, right assistance appears through unexpected channels that human planning could never arrange. After 40 years of practicing the invisible treatment, Joel discovered its ultimate secret. The technique itself eventually disappears when you realize you are the truth you've been resting in. There's no person applying spiritual treatment. There's only consciousness recognizing itself. Advanced practitioners stopped doing the invisible treatment and started being it continuously. They lived from the constant recognition that spirit is the only power, presence, and reality. This wasn't a technique anymore. It was their natural state of consciousness. Joel called this living the completed demonstration. Instead of applying truth to problems, you recognize yourself as truth expressing without problems. Instead of using consciousness, you realize you are consciousness appearing as individual experience. When students reached this realization, miracles became natural rather than special. Healing, supply, guidance, and harmony flowed continuously because consciousness was no longer occasionally treating problems but constantly expressing perfection. Joel's final teaching about the invisible treatment concerned its global impact. When individuals rest in truth consistently, they contribute to the elevation of human consciousness worldwide. Your invisible spiritual work affects everyone through the interconnectedness of all consciousness. He believed that groups of students practicing the invisible treatment could influence world peace, natural disasters, economic stability, and social harmony through their combined rest in truth. Individual consciousness and global consciousness are one appearing as many. Joel often spent hours resting in truth about world situations without specific prayers or mental treatments. He would simply rest in the knowing that God's government is the only real power operating in world affairs, regardless of political appearances. Students who adopted this global perspective found their personal demonstrations improve dramatically. When you rest in truth for the world, you're simultaneously resting in truth for yourself. Universal consciousness and individual consciousness are inseparable. Near the end of his life, Joel revealed why he had kept the invisible treatment secret from most students. He feared people would try to use it to get things rather than rest in truth. The technique only works through genuine spiritual surrender, not spiritual manipulation. Joel had watched too many students try to use spiritual techniques for personal gain rather than spiritual realization. The invisible treatment requires complete surrender of personal will to divine will. It cannot be used, it can only be lived through surrender. He finally began teaching it openly because he realized the world was ready for this level of spiritual truth. Humanity was approaching a consciousness shift that would require understanding of invisible spiritual activity rather than visible religious ritual. Joel's final instruction was simple. Forget everything he taught about techniques and remember only truth. God is the only power, presence, and reality. When you rest in this knowing, everything needed appears without effort through invisible spiritual activity. Tonight, you've received Joel Goldsmith's deepest secret, the invisible treatment that transforms everything by doing nothing except resting in truth. You now understand why he guarded this teaching and why you're ready to receive it. The invisible treatment isn't another spiritual technique to practice. It's the recognition of how consciousness actually operates. When you stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything and simply rest in truth, Spirit's perfection appears automatically in your experience. Your life will never be the same now that you understand the invisible treatment. Problems that once seemed overwhelming will dissolve through your rest in truth. Challenges will transform into opportunities for deeper surrender to Spirit's perfect government. Remember Joel's final words. The greatest spiritual work is invisible work. The most powerful healing happens when you stop healing and start resting in wholeness. Tonight, begin your invisible treatment by resting in this truth. You are consciousness expressing perfectly as individual experience. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.
When you awaken to this understanding, you discover that the entire nature of your existence shifts. You are no longer living as a separate being, struggling against the world, fighting circumstances, or trying to overcome evil with human effort. You realize that there is a presence within you, an invisible, infinite intelligence that has been with you always, sustaining your very breath, closer than your own heartbeat. This awakening is not something you achieve through study alone, though study may prepare the ground. It comes in a moment of stillness, in the silence where all human striving ceases. In that sacred instant, not with the mind, but with your entire being, that you are not living your own life. Life is living itself as you. The power that created the stars, that moves the oceans, that brings forth spring after winter, is the very power that animates your existence. With this realization, fear begins to dissolve. How can you fear when you understand that the infinite is your being? How can you feel separate or alone when you recognize that every person you meet is an expression of this same divine consciousness? The sense of personal responsibility that has weighed you down transforms into a joyful awareness that you need not carry the burden of your life alone. There is a wisdom within that knows the way. You begin to live by grace rather than by effort. This does not mean you become passive. Quite the opposite. You discover a wellspring of energy and inspiration that flows through you effortlessly. Work becomes worship. Every act, however mundane, becomes an opportunity to let this consciousness express itself. The world does not change, but your perception of it transforms completely. Where you once saw lack, you now see abundance flowing from an infinite source. Where you once saw enemies, you now see fellow travelers on the path, each awakening in their own time. Where you once saw problems to be solved, you now see opportunities for this inner wisdom to reveal itself. This is not a destination, but an unfolding awareness that deepens with each passing day. Each time you return to the silence, each time you remember the presence within, you open more fully to the truth of your being. And in that truth, you find not only your own freedom, but become a light for others who are still searching in the darkness of their separate sense of self. Shift from separation to oneness. The awakening transforms your perception from seeing yourself as a separate, struggling individual into recognizing yourself as an expression of infinite divine consciousness that sustains all life. Living by grace, not effort. Understanding replaces human striving with effortless flow, where divine wisdom guides your actions and you discover that life itself lives through you rather than you living your own separate life. Dissolution of fear. When you realize the infinite is your true being, Fear naturally falls away because you understand you are never alone or separate from the source of all creation. Transformation of perception. The world remains unchanged, but your vision transforms. Lack becomes abundance, enemies become fellow travelers, and problems become opportunities for inner wisdom to manifest. Awakening as continuous unfolding. This realization is not a final destination, but an ever-deepening awareness that grows through returning to inner silence, ultimately making you a light for others still experiencing separation. When you live in the belief that you are a separate being, you experience life as a constant battle. You wake each morning with a sense that you must make things happen, that your survival depends on your own efforts, your own planning, your own ability to manipulate circumstances in your favor. This sense of separation creates an exhausting existence where you are forever trying to protect yourself, advance yourself, improve yourself as if you were alone in a hostile universe. But in the moment of awakening, something profound occurs. The walls of separation begin to crumble, and you see that what you thought was your individual life is actually the movement of one infinite life expressing itself uniquely through your form. You are not cut off from the source of all being. You are that source in manifestation. The same intelligence that orchestrates the movement of planets, that causes seeds to become trees, that heals wounds without your conscious direction, is the very intelligence that constitutes your being. This is not a concept to be grasped intellectually, though the mind may prepare the way. It is a living realization that transforms everything. When you truly understand that you are not separate from the divine consciousness, you stop trying to live your life through personal effort alone. You begin to recognize that there is a power already present, already functioning, already knowing what needs to be done. Your role shifts from being the doer to being the instrument through which this power flows. In this recognition, you discover that you have never been alone in your struggles. Every moment of your life, even in the darkest hours when you felt abandoned, this presence was there, sustaining you, breathing you, maintaining the rhythm of your heart. The separation you experienced was not real. It was only your belief in separation that made it seem so. Now you see that your very existence is proof of your connection to the infinite. You could not draw a single breath without this divine life animating you. As this understanding deepens, you begin to see others differently. The person standing before you is no longer just another separate individual competing for the same limited resources. They too are an expression of this one consciousness. The infinite is looking out through their eyes, just as it looks through yours. When you speak to them, you are speaking to another facet of the same divine presence that you have discovered within yourself. This changes everything about your relationships, your business dealings, your family interactions. The struggle against circumstances also dissolves. You realize that you are not pitting your limited human strength against the problems of the world. Instead, you are allowing infinite intelligence to meet every situation. Where there appeared to be obstacles, you now perceive opportunities for this inner wisdom to reveal solutions you could never have conceived with the limited human mind. Where there seemed to be enemies, you now recognize misunderstandings waiting to be dissolved by the light of truth. This shift from separation to oneness is not something that happens once and remains static. It is a continuing revelation that unfolds as you return again and again to the awareness of your true nature. Each time you pause in the midst of your daily activities and remember that you are not alone, that you are not separate, that the infinite is your very being, you open more fully to this truth. The sense of being a small, isolated self gradually gives way to the magnificent recognition that you are an individualization of the infinite itself, lacking nothing, needing nothing from outside yourself, complete in your union with all that is. There is a way of living that most of humanity has never discovered, a way that flows from an inner source rather than from outer effort. For years, perhaps for your entire life, you have been taught that success, happiness, and fulfillment come through striving, through pushing, through making things happen by the force of your personal will. You have carried the weight of your world on your shoulders, believing that if you don't make it happen, it won't happen. This exhausting mode of existence has left you depleted, anxious, and often disappointed when your best efforts fail to produce the results you seek. But when awakening comes, you discover an entirely different way of being. You realize that there is a divine intelligence already operating in your life, a wisdom that knows infinitely more than your conscious mind could ever comprehend. This intelligence has been present all along, but you were too busy planning, scheming, and forcing outcomes to notice its gentle guidance. In the silence of your awakened awareness, you finally hear what has always been speaking within you. Living by grace means you cease trying to be the author of your own life. You stop exhausting yourself with endless mental calculations about what you should do, how you should do it, when you should act. Instead, you learn to listen. In the quiet moments, in the spaces between your thoughts, this inner wisdom makes itself known. It may come as an intuition, a sudden knowing, a sense of rightness about a particular direction. You learn to trust this guidance more than you trust your own limited reasoning. This does not mean you become passive or lazy. Those who live by grace often accomplish far more than those who live by effort alone. But they do so without the strain, without the anxiety, without the burden of believing everything depends on them. Work becomes effortless, not because it requires no action, but because the action flows from inspiration rather than from obligation. You find yourself moved to do what needs to be done, but the doing comes naturally, almost joyfully, like a river finding its way to the sea. When you live by grace, you discover resources you never knew you had. Ideas come to you that your educated mind could never have produced. Solutions appear for problems that seemed unsolvable. Doors open that you never even knocked upon. People enter your life at precisely the right moment with precisely what you need. You begin to see that there is an orchestration happening, a divine choreography in which you play your part without needing to control the entire dance. The energy you once spent in worry and planning now becomes available for creative expression. Where you once felt drained by the demands of life, you now feel energized because you are not carrying the weight alone. The infinite source that creates galaxies and sustains all life is the same source that flows through you, meeting every need, fulfilling every true purpose, expressing itself as your daily existence. This way of living requires a profound shift in trust. You must learn to let go of the reins you have held so tightly, to release your grip on how you think things should unfold. You must become willing to not know, to not have all the answers, to not control every outcome. In this surrender, you discover that you are not giving up your power. You are accessing a power infinitely greater than your personal will could ever be. Each day becomes an adventure in grace. You wake not with a heavy agenda of what you must accomplish through your own effort, but with an openness to what this divine intelligence wishes to express through you. Your life becomes a demonstration that there is a better way, a way of effortless achievement, of inspired action, of living in the flow of infinite wisdom. Fear has been your constant companion for so long that you may not even recognize how thoroughly it has shaped your life. It whispers in your ear when you wake in the morning, reminding you of all that could go wrong. It tightens your chest when you think about the future, painting pictures of loss, failure, and disaster. It lives in your worry about money, your anxiety about health, your concern for those you love, your dread of aging, and ultimately, your terror of death itself. This fear has driven so many of your decisions, caused you to play small when you could have soared, kept you clinging to security when adventure called. But when you awaken to the understanding that the infinite is your very being, fear begins to lose its grip. How can you truly fear when you realize that what you are in your deepest essence cannot be threatened, cannot be diminished, cannot be destroyed? The person you thought you were, that small, vulnerable self navigating a dangerous world, that was only a false sense of identity. Your true nature is the eternal, the boundless, the indestructible consciousness that has always been and will always be. This realization does not come through positive thinking or through trying to convince yourself that everything will be fine. It comes through a direct knowing that changes everything. When you experience, even for a moment, that you are not separate from the source of all existence, you understand at the deepest level that you are held, sustained, and protected by the very intelligence that maintains the universe. What could possibly threaten that which is infinite? What could harm that which is eternal? Consider the nature of your fears. Most of them revolve around loss. Loss of health, loss of wealth, loss of loved ones, loss of status, loss of life itself. But when you know yourself as an expression of the infinite, you realize that there is nothing to lose because nothing was ever truly yours to possess. The life flowing through you belongs to the infinite. The intelligence animating your mind is divine intelligence. The love you feel is the movement of infinite love recognizing itself. You have been trying to protect and preserve what was never yours to hold in the first place. As this understanding deepens, you find that situations which once paralyzed you with fear now meet with a quiet confidence. Not the confidence of the ego that believes it can handle anything, but the confidence of one who knows that infinite wisdom is present to meet every circumstance. When health challenges arise, you do not deny them or pretend they don't exist, but neither do you collapse into terror. You recognize that the same power that created your body knows how to heal it, and you rest in that knowing even as you take whatever human steps are necessary. Financial concerns, which once kept you awake at night, begin to soften when you understand that your source is infinite. You still act responsibly, you still work and plan, but the underlying anxiety dissolves because you know that your well-being does not depend solely on the money in your bank account. There is an invisible supply that flows from the infinite, meeting your needs in ways you could never have orchestrated yourself. Even the great fear of death transforms in this awakening. When you know yourself as eternal consciousness temporarily expressing through a physical form, death becomes simply a transition, not an ending. The body may cease, but that which you truly are continues, for it was never born and therefore cannot die. This freedom from fear does not mean you become reckless or careless. It means you live fully, openly, without the constriction that fear brings. You take appropriate action when needed, but you do so from wisdom rather than from panic. You move through life with an underlying peace that remains steady even when circumstances appear threatening, because you have touched something within yourself that cannot be shaken. The world you see before you has not changed, yet everything appears different. The same streets you walked yesterday still stretch before you. The same people populate your life. The same circumstances surround you, but your eyes have been opened to a reality that was always present, yet hidden from view. This is the miracle of awakened perception. Not that the world transforms, but that you finally see what has always been true. Where you once looked at your bank account and saw insufficiency, you now perceive the invisible abundance that surrounds you. You begin to notice how needs are met, sometimes from the most unexpected sources. The friend who calls at just the right moment with an opportunity, the check that arrives unexpectedly, the solution that presents itself when you had exhausted all apparent options. These are not coincidences, but evidences of an infinite supply that flows when you are open to receive it. You realize that lack was never the truth of your existence. It was only your limited perception that made it seem so. The people in your life appear in an entirely new light. That difficult colleague who irritated you endlessly. You now see someone struggling with their own sense of separation, acting from their own unhealed wounds. The family member who disappointed you repeatedly. You recognize another soul on a journey, doing the best they can with their current level of understanding. You no longer need them to change in order for you to be at peace. Where you once saw enemies and adversaries, you now see fellow travelers, each at their own stage of awakening. Some are further along the path, some are just beginning, but all are expressions of the same divine consciousness learning to recognize itself. Even those who seem to oppose you, who block your way or create difficulties, are no longer viewed as obstacles to be overcome. They are part of the divine choreography, appearing in your experience to reveal something, to teach something, to polish away some remaining edge of your separate sense of self. You may still need to take appropriate action in response to their behavior, but you do so without the inner turmoil that once accompanied such situations. You act from wisdom rather than from reaction. Problems themselves undergo a complete transformation in your perception. What once appeared as insurmountable obstacles now present themselves as invitations for the infinite intelligence within you to reveal its nature. That business challenge is not a threat to your survival, but an opportunity for creative solutions to emerge from the silence. That relationship difficulty is not evidence of your unworthiness, but a chance for deeper understanding and compassion to manifest. That health issue is not a punishment or a random misfortune, but perhaps a call to listen more deeply to what your body and spirit are communicating. You begin to see that every situation, no matter how it appears on the surface, contains within it the seeds of something greater. The loss that devastated you opens the door to a new chapter you would never have chosen, but which brings unexpected gifts. The failure that seemed to end your dreams clears the ground for something more aligned with your true purpose. The delay that frustrated you positions you perfectly for an opportunity that hadn't yet arrived. This transformed perception extends even to yourself. Where you once saw inadequacy and limitation, you now recognize infinite potential expressing itself in a unique form. Your mistakes are no longer evidence of your unworthiness, but simply part of the learning process, the way consciousness discovers itself through experience. Your weaknesses are not flaws to be hidden, but places where you remain open, teachable, humble enough to let divine strength operate. The beauty of this transformation is that it requires no change in external circumstances. You need not wait for your situation to improve, for difficult people to leave your life, or for problems to be solved before you can experience this new way of seeing. The shift happens within, and once it occurs, The entire world is bathed in a different light. The awakening you experience is not a destination where you arrive and then remain forever unchanged. It is not a single moment of illumination after which you possess complete understanding for all time. Rather, it is the beginning of an infinite unfolding, a deepening that continues throughout your life and beyond. Each day brings new opportunities to remember what you have discovered, to see more deeply into the truth of your being, to allow this understanding to permeate more fully into every corner of your existence. You will find that the realization comes and goes, at least in the beginning. There are moments of crystal clarity when you know beyond any doubt that you are one with the infinite, that all is well, that divine intelligence is operating perfectly in your life. In these moments, you touch something so real, so profound, that it changes you permanently. But then you return to your daily activities, and the old habits of thought reassert themselves. You find yourself worrying again, struggling again, forgetting the truth you knew so clearly just hours before. This is not failure. This is the natural rhythm of spiritual awakening. You are learning to live in two worlds simultaneously, the world of appearances and the world of truth. You are training your consciousness to remain anchored in the invisible reality, even while dealing with visible circumstances. Each time you forget, and then remember, each time you fall back into fear, and then return to peace, you are strengthening your capacity to abide in this awareness. The key is in the returning. When you notice that you have drifted back into the old way of seeing, into the sense of separation and struggle, you need not condemn yourself or believe you have lost your awakening. Simply return to the silence. Pause in whatever you are doing and remember. Close your eyes for a moment and feel the presence that breathes you. Acknowledge the intelligence that sustains your existence. Touch again that still point within where you know yourself as something far greater than the struggling human self. Each time you make this return, the awareness deepens. What once required great effort becomes more natural. The silence that once seemed difficult to find becomes more accessible. The peace that once visited you briefly begins to remain longer. You discover that you can maintain your connection to this inner truth even while engaged in activity, even in the midst of challenging situations, even when surrounded by others who are lost in their own sense of separation. As this deepening occurs, something remarkable happens. You become a presence of peace in a world of turmoil. You need not speak of your understanding or try to convince others of what you have discovered. Your very being begins to radiate something that others can sense even if they cannot name it. People are drawn to you without knowing why. They feel calmer in your presence, more hopeful, more at peace with themselves. This is how awakening spreads, not through preaching or teaching, though those have their place, but through the silent transmission that occurs when one who knows meets one who is seeking. You become a light not by trying to be a light, but simply by being what you are, by living from this deepened awareness. Those who are ready to awaken will recognize something in you that mirrors their own deepest nature, and that recognition may spark their own journey inward. The unfolding never ends because the infinite is, by its very nature, inexhaustible. There are always new depths to discover, new dimensions of understanding to explore, new ways for this truth to express itself through your unique form. Your life becomes an eternal adventure of discovery, each day offering fresh revelations of what has always been true. You are not climbing toward some distant peak of enlightenment. You are diving ever deeper into the infinite ocean of consciousness that you already are. And so you stand at the threshold of a new way of being. The understanding that has touched you is not something you must struggle to maintain or fear losing. It is the truth of your existence, and truth cannot be destroyed. It can only be temporarily forgotten and then remembered again. Each time you return to the silence, each time you pause to acknowledge the presence within, you are not creating something new, but recognizing what has always been. This journey asks only one thing of you: be willing to remember. In the morning when you wake, remember. In the midst of your challenges, remember. When fear whispers its lies, remember. When the world presents its problems, remember. You are not alone. You have never been alone. The infinite lives as you, breathes as you, and knows the way forward even when your human mind cannot see it. Let this understanding settle into the deepest places of your being. Let it transform not just your thoughts, but your entire experience of life. And as you walk this path of continuous awakening, know that you serve not only your own liberation, but the awakening of all humanity. For in truth, there is only one awakening to itself through countless forms, and your remembering helps all others remember. The journey has begun. The unfolding is eternal, and you are forever held in the infinite embrace of that which you truly are. Have you ever wondered if there's more to Jesus Christ than what you've been taught all your life? What if everything you believe about spiritual power and divine presence has been limited by centuries of religious tradition? Now, imagine for a moment that the Jesus you learned about in Sunday school wasn't just a historical figure to be worshipped from a distance, but actually the blueprint for your own spiritual awakening. What would change in your life if you discovered that the Christ wasn't merely a person who lived 2,000 years ago, but a living presence available to you right now, in this very moment? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. This is exactly what mystical teacher Joel Goldsmith uncovered after decades of spiritual exploration and practice. His revolutionary understanding shattered conventional religious boundaries and opened a doorway to experiencing divine power in everyday life. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when a new understanding suddenly makes everything you thought you knew appear in an entirely different light. Stay with me until the end, because what Goldsmith discovered about Jesus and the Christ principle might transform not just your spiritual understanding, but your entire experience of life itself. He found that Jesus of Nazareth was not some supernatural being beyond our comprehension, but rather a man who achieved something extraordinary. He became so filled with Christ consciousness that his human personality dissolved into pure spiritual being. What you're about to discover might surprise you. Those miraculous healings, the walking on water, the feeding of thousands, these weren't performed through Jesus's personal power or special divine favor. They happened because Jesus recognized his complete oneness with the infinite source. Remember when Jesus said, "I can of mine own self do nothing"? He wasn't being modest. He was revealing the profound secret of his spiritual mastery. The human Jesus became transparent to the Christ presence flowing through him. He didn't heal people through some magical ability that only he possessed. Instead, he recognized the spiritual perfection that was already present within every person who came seeking help. And here's the truly revolutionary part. Goldsmith teaches that this same Christ presence exists within you right now. It's not something you develop through years of spiritual practice or earn through good behavior. It's your fundamental spiritual identity that remains perfect and whole, regardless of what appears to be happening in your human experience. Jesus simply demonstrated what becomes possible when we stop identifying with human limitation and recognize our divine nature. What if the struggles you're facing right now, whether physical, emotional, financial, or relational, could be transformed through this same recognition? What if the power that healed the blind, made the lame walk, and even conquered death is actually your birthright as a spiritual being? If you're resonating with these teachings on Christ consciousness, hit subscribe to join our spiritual community and continue exploring these transformative principles together. The implications of this understanding go far beyond religious belief or theological concepts. They touch the very core of how you experience daily life, your relationships, your health, and even your sense of purpose in this world. Think about it. What Goldsmith reveals is that the same Christ presence that expressed itself through Jesus exists within you right now. This isn't some mystical theory or theological abstraction. It's a practical revelation about your true identity. The journey to discovering this hidden truth within yourself doesn't require special qualifications or years of religious devotion. It's your fundamental spiritual identity that remains perfect regardless of human circumstances. This understanding creates a profound mindset shift in how we approach our challenges. When you're facing illness, relationship conflicts, or financial struggles, you're not a broken human being pleading with a distant deity for help. You're a perfect spiritual expression temporarily, forgetting your divine nature. The transformation happens in that moment of recognition, when you remember who you truly are. Most of us have been conditioned to pray as if we're sending requests to an external God, hoping our messages reach some divine inbox. We ask Jesus or God to intervene in our lives, to fix our problems, to heal our bodies. But what if prayer was never meant to be about getting God's attention? What if the entire paradigm of prayer as petition is missing the mark? When you understand that Christ lives as your true being, prayer undergoes a radical metamorphosis. It becomes a moment of recognition rather than request. You're not trying to convince God to help you. You're awakening to the divine presence that has never been absent from your experience. This is the profound insight that revolutionizes spiritual practice. Imagine the impact this could have on your daily experience. Instead of starting your day with worried thoughts and anxiety about what might go wrong, you begin with the quiet recognition of your spiritual identity. Problems that seemed insurmountable suddenly reveal themselves as opportunities for Christ consciousness to demonstrate its infinite power through you. This isn't positive thinking or psychological technique. It's a fundamental realignment with what has always been true about you. The reason this approach creates such dramatic shifts in people's lives is that it's not about adding something new to your experience. It's about removing the veils of misunderstanding that have obscured your spiritual vision. I've witnessed people with chronic health conditions that didn't respond to medical treatment experience complete healing when they caught even a glimpse of this truth. I've seen decades-long family conflicts dissolve when just one person in the situation recognized the Christ presence in themselves and others. The revelations that emerge from this understanding don't just change your spiritual beliefs. They transform your entire journey through this world. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring how this recognition shifts your identity from human to spiritual being, and how that shift creates space for genuine healing to occur. If something in this message resonates with your inner knowing, write, "I recognize the Christ within," in the comments below. When you fully grasp that you are not a limited human having occasional spiritual moments, but rather a spiritual being having a temporary human experience, everything changes. This profound identity shift isn't just a conceptual understanding, it's a complete revolution in consciousness that transforms how you navigate every aspect of life. When this truth deeply penetrates your awareness, you begin to see yourself differently. The human persona you've identified with for decades, with all its history, limitations, and struggles, is recognized as just the outer expression of something far more profound. Behind the scenes of your human life exists a perfect spiritual identity that has never been damaged, limited, or separate from divine wholeness. This revelation creates a dramatic mindset shift. Every challenge that appears in your life is no longer a problem to be solved or endured. It becomes an invitation, a sacred opportunity to demonstrate the Christ presence that is your true nature. The difficult colleague at work, the unexpected financial setback, the chronic health condition, all transform from burdensome problems into opportunities for spiritual awakening. Joel Goldsmith witnessed the incredible healing power of this recognition throughout his decades of spiritual work. His practice produced thousands of transformative healings when people caught even a glimpse of their true spiritual identity. These weren't minor improvements or temporary relief. They were profound shifts that completely altered people's life trajectories. What makes these healings so remarkable is that they didn't occur through human effort, willpower, or even traditional prayer. They happened through the simple yet profound recognition of spiritual truth. When someone's consciousness opened to recognize their divine nature, diseases that had resisted years of medical treatment suddenly disappeared. Relationships that seemed irreparably broken experienced complete reconciliation. Financial situations that looked hopeless transformed into abundance. This isn't positive thinking or psychological technique. It's something far more fundamental. When you glimpse your spiritual identity, you're not creating a new reality through mental effort. You're simply aligning with what has always been true behind the appearance of human limitation. The journey to this recognition doesn't require years of arduous spiritual practice. It can happen in an instant when you're ready to let go of your investment in seeing yourself as limited. The most compelling evidence for this approach is in the transformations it creates. I've witnessed people who struggled with chronic pain for decades experience complete relief when they recognize themselves as spiritual beings rather than physical bodies with problems. I've seen businesses on the brink of bankruptcy suddenly receive unexpected opportunities when their owners shifted from fear-based scrambling to recognition of divine intelligence operating through their work. Subscribe to this channel if you want to dive deeper into practical spiritual wisdom that can transform your everyday experience from limitation to limitless possibility. These revelations aren't abstract or theoretical. They create tangible results in everyday life. The shift happens when you stop seeing yourself as a human struggling to become more spiritual and instead recognize yourself as inherently spiritual, temporarily expressing through human form. This understanding doesn't just change your beliefs, it transforms your entire experience. If you've experienced moments where you sensed your spiritual identity beyond your human story, type "I am spirit" in the comments below. Let's explore how this understanding played out in real people's lives and the specific practices that help them maintain this spiritual recognition even during difficult circumstances. One of the most profound revelations I've witnessed in Goldsmith's work is how this understanding transforms even the most entrenched human problems, situations that seemed completely hopeless through conventional approaches. Consider the breakthrough experience of a woman who came to Goldsmith's classes carrying decades of bitter resentment toward her ex-husband. This wasn't just a minor grievance. It was a deep wound that had poisoned her emotional landscape for 15 years. She had tried everything the human mind could conceive to heal this pain: intensive therapy, forgiveness exercises, meditation retreats, even medication for the depression that had developed alongside her resentment. Nothing worked. Then she encountered this profound truth about Christ consciousness, and something fundamental shifted in her perception. She realized that holding on to anger wasn't just hurting her emotionally, it was actively denying the Christ presence in both herself and her former spouse. This wasn't about pretending the hurt hadn't happened or excusing harmful behavior. It was about recognizing a spiritual reality deeper than the human story. The transformation wasn't gradual, it was immediate and decisive. Within just 3 weeks of this recognition, something happened that defied all conventional expectations. Her ex-husband called unexpectedly after years of painful silence. He apologized sincerely for years of hurtful behavior and asked for her forgiveness. Even more remarkably, she found herself responding from a wellspring of genuine compassion she didn't know she possessed. This wasn't positive thinking or psychological technique at work. When she recognized Christ as her true identity, the love that had always been present beneath the human drama emerged naturally, creating space for healing that 15 years of conventional approaches couldn't achieve. This same principle applies powerfully in the material realm too. A businessman facing imminent bankruptcy attended one of Goldsmith's retreats as a final desperate measure. He had exhausted every human solution, refinancing, marketing pushes, staff cuts, consultants, and was preparing to lose everything he had built over 20 years. When he heard that Christ consciousness was his true identity, something clicked into place. He experienced an inner alignment that transformed his entire approach. Instead of frantically chasing potential clients from a place of desperation and fear, he began each day by quietly acknowledging the Christ presence within himself and within every person he would encounter. This shift wasn't just spiritual theory. It completely changed how he operated in the marketplace. He stopped trying to manipulate outcomes through force of will and started trusting the divine intelligence that knew how to prosper him better than his human mind could conceive. The results defied conventional business logic. Within just 2 months, 3 major contracts appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Companies that had never responded to his proposals suddenly reached out wanting to work with him. If you've ever experienced an unexpected solution appear after letting go of desperate control, type divine. Timing in the comments below. What changed wasn't his strategy or market conditions, it was his consciousness. Let's examine how this principle works in even more challenging human circumstances, like addiction and family dynamics. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking human struggles is watching a loved one battle addiction. The feelings of helplessness, fear, and grief can be overwhelming, especially for parents witnessing their children's suffering. One mother's journey demonstrates the extraordinary breakthrough possible through spiritual recognition. She had watched her teenage son spiral into drug addiction and despair, despite her best efforts to help. Every conventional intervention had failed. Counselors, rehabilitation programs, tough love approaches all seemed to make the situation worse rather than better. In desperation, she turned to Goldsmith's teachings and discovered a radical new approach. She needed to stop seeing her son as an addict, a broken human being, needing to be fixed, and start recognizing the perfect Christ presence that was his true spiritual identity. This wasn't denial or enabling destructive behavior. It required holding steadfast to a spiritual truth that contradicted everything her physical eyes were showing her. The journey wasn't immediate. For 6 months, she maintained this inner recognition despite no visible evidence of change. She stopped reacting to her son's behavior from fear and started responding from the Christ consciousness within herself. The transformation that eventually occurred was profound and lasting. Her son began making different choices, sought help voluntarily, and reconnected with his family. Years later, he told her something revealing. He could feel something different in how she looked at him, something that helped him remember who he really was beneath the addiction. Her shift in consciousness created space for his own awakening to occur. This revelation points to a practical pathway for living Christ consciousness in your daily life. The key is consistency and recognition. Each morning before engaging with human problems, acknowledge the Christ presence as your true being. This doesn't require elaborate rituals or hours of meditation, just a quiet moment of remembering who you truly are. Throughout the day, when challenges arise, difficult conversations, unexpected obstacles, physical discomforts, pause and remember that you are not a limited human trying to fix problems. You are Christ consciousness expressing itself through seeming difficulties. This simple recognition shifts your entire relationship to problems. When you maintain this practice consistently, you'll notice that challenges don't necessarily disappear from your life, but your relationship to them transforms completely. You stop feeling victimized by circumstances and start experiencing yourself as a spiritual presence moving through human conditions. The inner landscape of fear, anxiety, and overwhelm gradually gives way to peace, clarity, and inspired action. This isn't a path of escaping human experience, but of bringing spiritual consciousness into every aspect of your humanity. Your relationships, work, creative expressions, and daily activities all become opportunities to demonstrate the Christ presence that is your true nature. If you're committed to remembering your true spiritual identity during daily challenges, type "I choose awareness" in the comments below. Let's explore the specific meditation techniques that Goldsmith taught to deepen this recognition. Beyond the intellectual understanding of spiritual identity lies the transformative journey of embodying this truth through consistent practice. Goldsmith's approach wasn't about complex rituals or esoteric techniques. He focused on simple yet profound practices accessible to anyone, regardless of their spiritual background. The first essential practice he called the listening ear. This represents a radical departure from conventional prayer. Most spiritual traditions teach us to talk to God, to petition, praise, or plead with a divine presence outside ourselves. But Goldsmith discovered something revolutionary. Spiritual transformation accelerates when we reverse this dynamic. Instead of constantly talking to God, the practice involves learning to be still and listen for divine guidance arising from within your own consciousness. This isn't about hearing audible words, but sensing the subtle current of wisdom that flows beneath mental chatter. Begin with just 5 minutes of complete silence each morning. Not asking for anything, not trying to solve problems, simply listening with receptive awareness. At first, you'll likely encounter the usual mental noise. Worries about the day ahead, rehashing of yesterday's events, random thoughts jumping from one subject to another. But if you persist in this practice, gradually you'll sense a deeper presence emerging from behind the mental static. This is Christ consciousness communicating with your receptive awareness. The guidance that emerges from this listening practice differs dramatically from conventional decision-making. It's always loving, always constructive, always peaceful. When you learn to consult this inner wisdom before taking action, your choices align with a higher intelligence that sees beyond your human limitations. The second transformative practice is contemplative meditation on spiritual identity. Throughout your day, especially during stressful or challenging moments, silently remind yourself, I am not a body, I am not a mind, I am not emotions, I am Christ consciousness appearing as individual being. This isn't positive affirmation or wishful thinking, it's recognition of spiritual fact. When you're stuck in traffic rather than fuming about delays, use those moments to contemplate your true identity. When facing financial pressure, instead of calculating limitations, acknowledge the infinite abundance That is your spiritual inheritance. When dealing with difficult people, look past their human behavior to the Christ presence that is their true nature beneath the facade. This practice gradually shifts your entire perspective from human reaction to spiritual response. The external circumstances haven't changed, but your relationship to them transforms completely. You stop being victimized by conditions and start demonstrating mastery through recognition of what you truly are. What makes these practices so powerful is their simplicity and accessibility. You don't need special environments, expensive retreats, or years of training. You can begin integrating them into your daily life immediately, creating small pockets of spiritual recognition throughout your day. If you've experienced moments of unexpected clarity or guidance when you became quiet within, type "Inner Wisdom Speaks" in the comments below. Let's explore how these practices create powerful healing effects when applied to specific human challenges. One of the most transformative aspects of Goldsmith's teaching involves what he called impersonal healing through Christ recognition. This approach radically shifts how we respond when someone asks for prayers or when we witness suffering in the world around us. The conventional human response is to immediately try fixing the problem, offering advice, suggesting treatments, or praying for divine intervention to change the troubling condition. But Goldsmith discovered a more powerful approach. Instead of trying to fix the human picture, silently recognize the Christ perfection that is already present within that person. This recognition isn't wishful thinking or denial of apparent difficulties. It's acknowledging a spiritual reality that exists beneath the surface of human appearance. When you hold this recognition steadily, knowing that spiritual truth is more powerful than any temporary human condition, something remarkable happens. The healing power isn't yours personally. You simply become transparent to the Christ consciousness that knows only perfection. Your role in this healing work is to get your human opinions, fears, and judgments out of the way so that divine love can express itself freely. This approach doesn't replace practical actions or medical treatment. It provides the spiritual foundation that allows human solutions to work more effectively. The most profound healings occur when we combine practical steps with this deep spiritual recognition. The beauty of this approach is that it works even when the other person isn't consciously aware of these spiritual principles. Goldsmith witnessed countless healings that occurred simply because someone held another in the light of spiritual recognition. This isn't manipulation or control. It's allowing divine love to flow through your consciousness without human interference. This same principle applies powerfully to your daily activities. Another essential practice involves carrying Christ consciousness into everything you do, transforming mundane tasks into spiritual demonstrations. Whether you're washing dishes, conducting business meetings, or caring for children, maintain awareness that Christ is expressing itself through your activities. When you drive your car, recognize that Christ consciousness is directing your journey. When you prepare meals, see Christ consciousness nourishing your family through your hands. When you work at your job, know that Christ consciousness is serving through your professional activities. This recognition elevates every aspect of life, from mere human effort to spiritual expression. This doesn't mean becoming impractical or otherworldly. In fact, your effectiveness in daily activities actually increases because you're aligned with infinite intelligence rather than limited human thinking. Decisions become clearer, relationships flow more harmoniously, and even physical energy increases when you recognize the divine source behind all action. Behind the scenes of every human activity lies infinite wisdom waiting to express through you. The most remarkable shift happens in your experience of ordinary moments. A sunset becomes a direct revelation of divine beauty. A conversation with a stranger reveals unexpected depth, and even challenges become doorways to greater spiritual awareness. If you've noticed how your daily activities transform when approached with spiritual awareness, type "divine in the ordinary" in the comments below. Now let's address the inevitable doubts and obstacles that arise on this path of spiritual recognition. Perhaps the biggest challenge people face when encountering these teachings is persistent doubt about their spiritual identity. After years, sometimes decades, of identifying with human limitations, suddenly recognizing yourself as Christ consciousness can feel impossible or even presumptuous. Goldsmith understood this resistance deeply and approached it with profound compassion and practical wisdom. He taught that doubt is not your enemy, but simply old mental habits that haven't yet caught up with spiritual truth. This insight alone relieves much of the frustration people experience when doubts arise during their spiritual journey. When you find yourself questioning whether this spiritual identity is really yours, or whether such profound transformation is actually possible in your life, don't fight against these doubts or feel guilty about having them. Simply acknowledge them as the human mind's natural response to expanding beyond familiar boundaries. Then gently return your attention to the recognition of your true spiritual nature. The key to overcoming doubt is persistence without force. Like water gradually wearing away stone, consistent recognition of Christ consciousness eventually dissolves patterns of limitation that have governed your experience. Some days the recognition feels strong and clear. Other days it seems distant and difficult to access. Both experiences are natural parts of the awakening process. Behind the scenes of this journey is a profound revelation. The very consciousness that seems to be struggling with doubt is itself an expression of the Christ presence you're recognizing. Even your doubts are held within infinite love. This understanding creates space for genuine transformation without the pressure of spiritual perfectionism. As you continue this practice of recognition through both clear and cloudy states of mind, something remarkable begins to happen. The effort required diminishes. The reminders become less necessary. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Christ consciousness becomes your natural way of being, rather than something you have to remember to practice. This is the ultimate transformation that Goldsmith witnessed in dedicated students. Spiritual recognition begins to flow automatically in challenging situations. Love emerges naturally in difficult relationships. Peace becomes your default state rather than something you achieve through effort. This doesn't mean you never face difficulties or never feel human emotions. It means you navigate life's experiences from an unshakable foundation of spiritual identity. Problems still arise in your human experience, but they no longer threaten your fundamental sense of well-being because you know who you truly are beneath all appearances. You become what Goldsmith called a transparency for Christ. Your personality remains uniquely yours, but it serves as a clear window through which divine love, wisdom, and power can express themselves in the world. The ripple effects of this transformation touch everyone you encounter, often in ways you never realize. People sense something different about your presence, a peace, a clarity, a compassion that transcends ordinary human interaction. You're not trying to influence others or demonstrate your spirituality. You're simply being authentically yourself from recognition of your true spiritual identity, and that authenticity naturally blesses everyone around you. If these teachings about overcoming doubt resonate with your own spiritual journey, type "Beyond Doubt" in the comments below. As we've journeyed together through these profound teachings of Joel Goldsmith, I hope you've caught even a glimpse of the Christ consciousness that is your true spiritual identity. This understanding isn't just spiritual theory. It's a practical pathway to experiencing greater peace, healing, and divine expression in your everyday life. If these teachings have resonated with something deep within you, Perhaps it's because they're awakening a recognition of who you truly are beneath all human appearances. That recognition is the beginning of a profound transformation that will touch every aspect of your life. I create these videos because I believe these spiritual truths are too powerful to remain hidden in obscure mystical texts. They're meant to be lived, experienced, and shared. If you feel the same way, consider subscribing to this channel where we explore these timeless principles of spiritual awakening every week. Your engagement means everything to this community of spiritual seekers. If something in this message has touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Simply write, "I am Christ expressing," to let me know these teachings have found their home. And if you found value in our time together, giving this video a like helps others discover these transformative teachings too. It's a simple act that creates ripples of awakening beyond what we can imagine. The journey of spiritual recognition doesn't end here. There's a video right here that explores how to maintain Christ consciousness during life's greatest challenges. Click and continue with me over there as we go even deeper into practical spiritual living. Remember, you are not alone on this path of awakening to your true divine nature.